Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mila, you're at Alexandrian Archives, and today we have a trilogy review, and I'm so excited because I can say that I actually own all 3 books. So, for those that don't know, oh gosh, did I say, my name is Mila, you're at Alexandrian Archives. Whoops. For those that don't know, I read most of the books that I tell you about on my Kobo. So I oftentimes don't have the physical copy, so I can't hold it up and show you. But in this case, I was like, no, I know I'm gonna love this series and I need physical copies. Also, the physical copies are just so pretty. I just couldn't resist. But isn't that the excuse every reader gives, right? The physical copy is too pretty, I can't resist. Anyways, so we have a trilogy review. For those that don't know, if I read the series sort of one after the other, I usually put the review into one video. That way you don't have to jump around or wait. However, if I read the series sort of with time in between, I do split it up. For example, I read the Lord of the Rings trilogy back to back, right? So I read Fellowship, then I read Two Towers, then I read Return of the King, with barely any time in between them, like maybe a day or two in between. Not even, actually. I basically jumped into the next book almost right away. But, however, for example, the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, I read book 1, and then there was some time before I read the second book and the third book. That's why on my channel you have Good Girl's Guide to Murder separately, and then As Good as Dead and, Good Girl, Bad Blood, and As Good as Dead in another video together. So in this case, it's going to be all 3 books. I will try to keep this as speedy and as knowledgeable and as action-packed and information-packed as possible. And how this works is I usually give you a synopsis of the book, I give you my thoughts and feelings, and then I give you sort of who I would recommend this for, and my rating is going to be somewhere there. Or editing Mila will get to it if she decides to be nice to past Mila. Who knows? You never know what the intention of editing Mila will be that day that she decides to edit this video. So, without further ado, let's get started. The first book I have is Sabriel. So today we are reviewing the Old Kingdom trilogy by Garth Nix, and yes, this is the 25th anniversary special edition, or classic edition, so it's the gold, whereas the original one is black. This book is older than me. This book is older than me. Anyways, so Garth Nix is a name I've heard about so often. I see it almost everywhere, okay? So because of that, I avoided his stuff because honestly I didn't know what any of his books were about. I remember seeing Left-Handed Booksellers of London. That was really interesting premise. I can't really tell you what it is off the top of my head, but at the time when I saw it and when I read the synopsis, I thought it was interesting. But I feel like, in a sense, because I saw Garth Nix a lot, I thought maybe he was a James Patterson 2.0 situation. However, he's not. He is not a James Patterson 2.0 situation. So you can feel at peace with the fact that he's not a James Patterson 2.0 situation. I have beef with James Patterson. Thankfully, Garth Nix is not a James Patterson 2.0 situation. So, this is his trilogy. This is his YA trilogy. I would say it's upper YA because the characters are on the upper end of the YA age range. In my head, personally, YA can go from, depending on the maturity of the child who's reading it as well. For example, I read YA way ahead of the time that I was supposed to. So I was definitely a more mature reader. And so in my head, YA is 12 to 18, maybe 19. But past 19, that's adult. New adult, however, is it's a tricky question, okay? I feel like people categorize new adult as still being the upper part of YA, but I categorize new adult as being the lower part of adult. So it's just different people, different things for different people, okay? Anyway, so this is upper YA because our main character is, I believe, 18 or something. Like, she's older, so she's finishing school. And basically, this is the titular main character. Her name is Sabriel, or Sabriel. I'm gonna say Sabriel because I can't think of any other way to say it, because if you just put the G, it would be Gabriel. So, like Gabrielle. Well, in some languages it is Gabrielle, but anyway, Sabriel is the daughter of the Abhorsen. So in this world, I'm going off on a tangent. In this world, you have sort of, it's split into two, right? The known world, I guess. So you have Ancelstier, which is the non-magic, technologically driven world that I would say is, I don't know, maybe like early 40s, 50s. That's what it seems to be. Like, there's technology, but sometimes it doesn't work. They have, like, the old style guns, I think, with the, you know, it just feels old school stuff. Like, really old. Not like 80s and 90s. That's not, it's considered old school, but, like, still, right? Like, I grew up with that stuff. So, and I wasn't even born in the 80s or 90s. So I was born in 2002. Anyways, so, like, I feel like it's 40s, 50s, 60s sort of England-esque or Australia-esque. I don't know much about the history of Australia and like the industry and sort of industrialization in Australia. But anyways, because the author's Australian. So anyways, so Ancelstier, no magic. It's very weak magic. And then you have the wall, okay? And on the other side of the wall is the Old Kingdom. The Old Kingdom is where both charter magic and free magic runs free. Charter magic is, as we learn later in the books, charter magic is free magic that is sort of bound to specific symbols and stuff, whereas free magic is just free magic. It's considered like corrupt, it's easily corrupted and stuff. So you want to be able to use charter magic, not free magic. You want people to use charter magic, not free magic. So that's the basis of it. So Sabriel is the daughter of the Abhorsen, who is a necromancer in both the Old Kingdom and Ancelstier. And, well, he can go back and forth, and he's one of the only few that can go back and forth without needing, like, visas or other papers and stuff like that. People can go back and forth. It's just that those from Ancelstier will have a hard time living in the Old Kingdom just because they don't have any links to the whole magic thing, okay? Whereas, and vice versa, because Old Kingdom people will find it hard to live in Ancelstier because there's just no magic, right? There's no sense of it. However, in Ancelstier, if you're close to the wall, you can use a little bit of the charter magic, and it's just that I think if you go beyond a certain distance, you cannot use charter magic anymore. It's very, very, very weak. So, as I was saying, Sabriel is the daughter of the Abhorsen, who is a necromancer, except in this case, the necromancer doesn't bring back the dead. He makes sure that the dead stay dead. And the necromancer uses these bells that all have different names and different sort of functions. So, for example, the smallest one is Rana, who is the sleeper, and when it rings, everyone will go to sleep. And then there's several different ones whose names I cannot tell you off the top of my head. And then you have a sword with marks on it, and that's like the charter magic sword. Anyway, really cool magic system. Definitely something I've never read before. And basically, Sabriel is on the other side of the wall. So she's in Ancelstier. She's at a like preparatory school. And they have charter, like it's close enough to the wall that you can use charter magic. Basically, she finds out that she gets a message from, like, in death. So death is like sort of the underworld, like where you go beyond life, right? So there's like a, I don't know how to explain it. Basically, a person can pass between life and death, right? Death with a capital D, that's the place where all the souls go. So basically, she goes into death because there's some sort of message, and her father tells her, like, her father gives her a message and is like, you have to stop this being, you have to find, like, you have to help, basically. And she gets a cryptic message from her father, and so yeah, so she basically goes to the Old Kingdom and goes to the Aporson's house and finds a cat named Mogget, who's fan-freaking-tastic and so funny. I love sarcastic cats because it captures just cats so well. If they were able to talk, I feel like every cat would be so sassy and so sarcastic. So she doesn't know much about the Old Kingdom because she lived most of her life in Excelsior, right? And her father visited from time to time, but that one time that he doesn't visit, she's like, okay, something's wrong. Like, he's past his time, he's always on time, something's wrong. And also the interesting thing to note is that Excelsior and the Old Kingdom run on different sort of time planes, I guess. So if it's like fall in Excelsior, it's like winter already in the Old Kingdom. So different dates, they run at different dates. So basically different time zones. So she goes to the Old Kingdom to rescue her father, and then there's this creature, there's this incredibly powerful person that needs to stay dead, and there she also meets a boy named Touchstone, which I won't go much into about, but yeah, what else can I say? That's basically the gist of it. I think this was one of the most unique, like, systems I've ever read. Sorry, I just have my notes on my computer. A second. Yeah. So I thought the whole necromancer thing is really interesting. I'm not one to like stuff with like death and necromancers because I think that shit's spooky. However, this was really good. It was dark for YA, and I read a lot of YA, and I read a lot of adult fantasy. I read quite a bit of like grimdark fantasy, right? So I know what would be considered normal dark for adult and then dark for YA, like, you know, that kind of thing. So I think this is dark for YA, but it's not super dark, like, it's not that bad, which is why I do say that it's upper YA and not lower or like middle YA. Definitely upper YA. I would recommend this for maybe 16 plus. Yeah. What else? I find the belts and charging magic to be really interesting as well. Touchstone and Sabriel's relationship, I won't touch too much about it. There's like an itty, like tiny romance line towards more or less the end of the book. It's not fleshed out as much, but I feel like for what this book aims to touch on, for what this book aims to focus on, which is the good versus evil, which is Sabriel becoming the Horson, which is, you know, her accepting that she's now tasked with this responsibility and all that stuff. I feel like it's the right amount. And I know people are saying that it's a bit insta-lovey, but when you're sort of, you know, I feel like when you're on the brink of almost saving the world, when you're on the brink of saving the world and you don't know if you will save the world, I feel like it doesn't matter if the romance is particularly fleshed out, because, like, you're gonna die, so you might as just well say, hey, I love you, you know, if it's the last thing that you manage to say, at least the other person knows, right? So it's like, I feel like for the plot and what's at stake, the romance is a good touch. Again, it's itty bitty, like tiny, like barely there. This, oh yeah, I initially rated this 4.75 stars, but now that I sit more on it, 5 stars. 5 stars, 5 stars. However, I do have a rating. I do have like a hierarchy, okay? And it's pretty solid, our hierarchy, I think. I did peruse the Reddit, some Reddit posts. I did spoil something for myself about the second book, but that's not a big deal because... Anyways, who would I recommend this for? Those that like necromancers with a twist in a totally new world, read it. I feel like fans of Spiderwick Chronicles would like this. It has like the same eerie vibe, and just like the cover sort of reminds me of the Spiderwick Chronicle covers. And also it's sort of a thing where, because in the Spiderwick Chronicles the sister gets trapped, right? So they have to rescue her at some point in one of the books. And so her father gets trapped and she has to rescue him, right? The cover gives early/late 90s fantasy vibes, which it is. It's late 90s. It's 1996. Romance is light and cute, really. I think for characters who are 18 plus, it was a solid pace. Yeah, I feel like in this case, because Sabriel never knows whether or not she'll live or die when she goes into death, or just in general, when she deals with like the zombies and the dead awoken and all that stuff, I feel like saying I love you to practically the first person, the first man she sees, is sort of like, I'm not surprised. I don't know. I understand the criticism, however, it just feels like that's not the focus of it. You know, it's not even like, you know, right? It's not the focus of it, and there's no need to, because this was actually, I found this out, this is actually meant to be a standalone. So the author wrote it with no other sequels in mind, like with no sequels in mind. And then he wrote the second book, Lyrial, which I will progress into in a moment, 6 years after this one. So I feel like this, I'll talk about it a little bit later at the end of the video, but I just feel like the romance in this, considering what happens in Lyrial, and not only the time between this one being published and that one being published, but also the time skip in between Sabriel and Lyrial, it just makes sense that we don't really need the romance. Like, that's not the whole point of it, right? So very minimal romance if you want minimal romance. The next one is Lyrial, and this is, first off, I'm obsessed with this cover. Sorry, there's like light reflecting it. There's a dog. Look at her. Look at her. Isn't she the bestest doggo? She's the bestest. So this is Lyrial. This is the chunkiest book. And this is my favorite book. And if you've seen any of my other videos, usually... Actually, this year, I can't even say that, because so far this year, my favorites in trilogies especially have been the second book, because, like, in Lord of the Rings, my favorite is The Two Towers. In the Old Kingdom trilogy, my favorite is Lyrial. In A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, Good Girl, Bad Blood is my favorite. So, like, I can't even say, but usually, a lot of the time, the second book doesn't really hit as well, and it feels like, maybe because this is like an older novel, I feel like that's my vibe at the moment. Like, I'm just reading books that are older than me and just enjoying the heck out of it, because newer books are just not hitting it at the moment. Anyways, I'm just gonna scroll down to where my thoughts for this one is. So in this one we follow Lyrial, and this is set, at the beginning it's set 14 years after the events of Sabriel, and then it's set on her 18th birthday, I believe, sometime after, so 4 years later. So 19 years later. The majority of the story is 19 years after Sabriel. So in this one, and this isn't really a big spoiler, yeah, this isn't a big spoiler, but basically Sabriel and Touchstone get married, and I can't really... I mean, you find out in one of the first few pages, right? Anyway, so Touchstone becomes king, and Sabriel becomes queen, okay? And they have 2 children, Elamir and Sameth. And Elamir is obviously the oldest, so she is the heir apparent, whereas Sameth is meant to be the person in waiting, so the next person after Sabriel. However, he doesn't like death. He went into it once, he got burned, and he just can't claim it. So then there's another group called the Clare, and the Clare are basically seers. And they have the sight and they see things, but it's just little snippets and, not a lot. They just see snippets of things. So Lyriel is a daughter of the Clare, and that's what it is. So you're the daughter of the Clare, right? But she doesn't have the sight, and she has been waiting for years to get the sight, and she just feels so out of place. And then so at one point she witnesses an interaction between Sabriel, Touchstone, and the Clare find her, and they're basically okay, you're gonna become, she's I want to work in the library, you're gonna become a library assistant. So she becomes a library assistant, and I just love the part where she's a library assistant, because I'm a library services assistant, and I want to work at a big spooky library, because it was so good. It was so good. It was wonderful. So basically, Lyriel has never really felt like a daughter of the Clare, and then she finds out that she's actually she ends up being the next, she ends up being the person in waiting, and Sameth ends up being something else. And I just love this book. I think the pacing is fantastic. No romance, thank God. Except the bit between Touchstone and Sabriel, but they're husband and wife, so that's normal. It was a really good book. What else can I say? Yeah, oh, and she has a dog called the Disreputable Dog. And the dog and Mogget at one point interact, and it's just so funny. My thoughts. I love how some things aren't entirely answered in this one, who is the disreputable dog? Who is Mogget really? I really love the double POV, and Nyx has a very interesting way of easily switching from Lyriel to the thoughts of the disreputable dog, both from third POV, so it makes sense. It's just a subtle thing that I feel not a lot of people can do, not a lot of writers can do. Not sure how I feel about the occasional third POV, but I enjoyed a look into the villain's POV. So that was the, connections were coming together, okay? Who would I recommend this for? I'd recommend this for those that read Sabriel and don't know if they should continue. Okay, the thing with the order of reading is that I feel like these two, okay, so Lyriel and Important, so 2 and 3, should be read one after the other. Sabriel, however, can be read alone, okay, or you can read these two and then Sabriel, or you can read Sabriel and then these two. It doesn't matter, but these two have to be read together. Okay, you can't just stop after Lyriel. You have to read Important. Sabriel, however, is sort of it's at a separate time, right? So it's in a completely separate sort of circle if we imagine a Venn diagram. So these two have to be read together. This one, however, can be read separately. I would recommend reading Sabriel, Lyriel, and then Important, which is what I did. However, as I said, you can read Lyriel, Important, and then read Sabriel, because in Lyriel, we find, we're learning about the chart of magic as she is learning also about the chart of magic, and we're learning about the bells as she's learning about the bells, and what each of them mean, and who each of them are, and the origins of the bells and stuff. So I feel like it's not too bad of a starting point. You might be confused, but I feel like it's not the end of the world, because there are references to bits and pieces of Sabriel. For example, Sameth's mom is Sabriel, so you're okay, what? You're a little confused. However, I feel like it's not that big of a deal. So you can read Lyrial and a Porson and then Sabriel and be totally fine. But yeah, you might want to read Sabriel first. It's just because it's an introduction to the world. That way you're not too confused when you go into Lyrial. However, you can read it sort of out of order, so to speak. Yeah, and again, as I said, Lyrial was published 6 years after Sabriel, and the author didn't intend to have a sequel. So, also, there's just no discrepancies in the writing whatsoever. Like, it feels the same. Even, I mean, it feels better. It reads better. It reads more interestingly, and there's a new cast of characters and stuff. So yeah. Oh, also 5 stars for this one. This is my favorite. It goes this one, and then a Porson. However, that doesn't mean that a Porson has a lower rating. No, a Porson is also 5 stars, which is rare for me to give 5 stars to all 3 books in a trilogy. And the only other trilogy that I've given where I've given all 3 books 5 stars is Lord of the Rings. So that's saying something. So I sped through this. So this is basically the sequel, right? So Sabriel and Touchstone are missing, leaving only Lyrial, newly come into her inheritance as the person waiting to stop the Destroyer. So this is a completely different villain than book 1, so book Sabriel. So we're in Lyrial, we're building up to this Destroyer. If Uranus's unspeakable powers are unleashed, it will mean the end of all life. With only a vision from the Clare to guide her and the help of her companions, Sam, the disreputable dog, and Moggy, Lyrial must search in life and death for some means to defeat the evil destructor before it is too late. I thought this was really interesting. See, the fact that she's a Porson doesn't mean that she will use or has the same sort of powers as Sabriel, which I really appreciate because it shows that there's slight differences in each Porson, like the way they do things, but it still means that they're still like the Porson. They're still important. So I really enjoyed this one. I sped through this. Check this series on Does the Dog Die, because just check this series if it's on the website Does the Dog Die. The ending gave me goosebumps because it's just the way that things came together and it came full circle. Oh my god, it was just, oh my god, it was so good. It was so good. Like, this was an absolute banger of an ending. I spoiled something for myself in regards to who Lyrial is, and I said this earlier, which is, and the reveal is in book 2, but it was still, the way that it came was still shocking. So yeah, I think, yeah, so recommended for, I'm just gonna say it's a fantastic and perfect ending to a fantastic and perfect trilogy. Do not read this if you haven't read Sabriel or Lyrial. You can however read it in this order: Lyrial, a Porson, and then Sabriel, because Sabriel is like a prequel. Yeah. And the general consensus is to ignore the other books, sort of like Clariel, Golden Hand, and I think Terciel and Eleanor, which are Sabriel's parents. So those are all prequels. No, sorry. I think Golden Hand is a sequel to like Lyrial and a Porson. Clariel is a prequel to Sabriel, and Terciel and Eleanor is also a prequel. So I think the general consensus is to sort of ignore them, because I've read some reviews and they're just not good. So that's when you know, like, the story doesn't need to be told even more. Like, there's nothing more to say really when it comes to this story, you know? What is that? What is that? Like, why would you? Gotcha. Like, so yeah, I hope you enjoyed this rambling review. And yeah, I really love this series and I highly, highly, highly recommend. Which is, I think, not something I say very often. So yeah. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down below. Follow me on all my socials. Check out my other videos, and I will see you in the next one. Happy reading!